Hi everyone, my name is Mark, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On September 22, 2023, Suzanne Morphew's remains were discovered, 3 years after her sudden disappearance on May 10, 2020. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation stumbled upon her remains during a search of an area in Moffett, Saguache County, as part of a separate investigation, breathing new life into the famously cold case of Suzanne Morphew's disappearance. A tumultuous personal life and an inconsistent recollection of events first pointed toward the husband as the likely suspect in what the police believed to be a murder. However, new evidence has called into question the 2-year-long crusade. Over 70 investigators invested 1,000 hours of work into Suzanne's case. 135 search warrants were issued, and dozens of over 400 people were interviewed before the police felt confident in charging Barry with the first-degree murder of his wife. Even after the charges were dropped based on inadequate evidence and mismanagement, there was no doubt in most people's eyes that Barry was guilty. However, after Suzanne's remains were found 50 miles outside their search area, and DNA evidence linked her death to a suspected serial killer, questions have arisen about what happened on the day of her disappearance. Is Barry Morphew far more resourceful than the authorities give him credit for? Or did something or someone from her personal life cause her death? Suzanne Morphew was born on April 11, 1971, to her parents, Jean and Adrian Alexandria, and grew up with 2 brothers, David and Andrew. Everyone who knew Suzanne described her as an amazing, intellectual, and thoughtful friend. In 1998, while in high school, Suzanne met her future husband, Barry Morphew, and married him after 6 years of dating. Matthew was a remarkable ball player and was signed with the Toronto Blue Jays, while Suzanne pursued a degree in education at Purdue University. Barry's career ended before it barely began after a serious injury, and he switched tracks, beginning a career in horticulture. Suzanne had been teaching for 4 years when Barry started his landscape company, which gained steam as more time passed. Together, the couple had 2 children, Mallory and Macy. They had a picture-perfect life in Indiana until Suzanne was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. She beat cancer twice, and in 2018, the Morphews moved to Maysville, Colorado, for a fresh start and to be closer to their daughter Mallory, attending Western State University. They moved to a gorgeous 7-acre property where Barry could hunt. He still worked as a contractor and had even taken up being a volunteer fireman, while Suzanne retired from teaching, devoting herself more to the church and taking up sports. Mountain biking was a new pastime she was exploring. From the outside looking in, the Morphews were the perfect family, but they had their share of problems, all of which would come to light following the events of May 10, 2020. May 10, 2010, started a bit differently from most Mother's Day celebrations at the Morphews' residence. Barry and the girls were out of the house, leaving Suzanne alone in their home. Barry claimed to have a landscaping appointment in the town of Broomfield, 3 hours away from Maysville by car. The girls, on the other hand, went on a camping trip. Barry and the girls had planned to return home by the evening to celebrate Mother's Day with Suzanne. However, the planned celebration never took place. That evening, the girls messaged their mother to wish her Happy Mother's Day but received no text message in return. They found this odd since their mother was very active on social media. Expecting a few pictures from her best friend's daughter's wedding, they knew she had to be on her phone. After a few hours of no reply, Mallory and Macy reached out to their neighbor, Martin Ritter, and his wife to check on Suzanne. Mrs. Ritter made the trip down to the Morphews' house around 4 o'clock to 4:30 p.m. to discover an empty house. She called Barry, explaining the situation, and he told her to check for Suzanne's mountain bike. If it was not there, he instructed her to call the police, and that's exactly what she did. The police showed up at the Morphew residence, and Barry Morphew and his 2 daughters made their way back home, desperate to learn the location and status of Suzanne. The police found their first solid clue a few hours into the search. The discovery turned the investigation on its head. 2 deputies found Suzanne's mountain bike off a steep ravine, not too far from Murphy's home. The location suggested that Suzanne might have likely been in a crash, but the bike itself and the surrounding vegetation did not indicate signs of a struggle. There were no skid marks indicating she used the brakes on her bike. No damage to the mountain bike itself despite tumbling down the side of a ravine, no blood, and the vegetation in the area hadn't been disturbed. The deputies deduced it was obviously placed there by somebody. When they presented Barry with this information, he had a bizarre reaction. Barry's odd mountain lion theory would be the first of many outlandish stories, conclusions, and accounts that he would provide the investigators while they searched for his wife. Several people found Barry's handling of his wife's disappearance odd, to say the least. In a secretly recorded conversation with YouTuber Tyson Draper, he went into further detail about his mountain lion story. Barry was also absent from the search parties organized by Suzanne's brother, Andrew. He didn't believe Barry's story about the bike ride and suggested that she might have been taken on May 9th instead of Mother's Day. Suspicion eventually shifted to him when Suzanne's helmet was found 1 mile away from the Morphew's home, in the exact direction that Barry's truck telemetry showed he'd taken that morning. Investigators might have written it off as an odd coincidence if it was not in the exact opposite direction of the Broomfield construction site he was set to visit that day. In the preliminary interview he gave the officers, he claimed to have been woken up by his alarm clock around 4:30 a.m. and left straight for Broomfield. Yet, the telematic data from his Ford F-350 showed that he'd driven 1 mile west before heading to the construction site. When Barry was confronted with the data gathered, Barry provided a convenient explanation. He claimed to have been scouting elk earlier that morning at around 4:30 a.m. and was curious to see which direction they were headed so that he could track them down later. Apparently, Barry had a habit of tranquilizing elk and removing their antlers for sale. When the officers pointed out that he couldn't have spotted the elk at 4:30 a.m. if he was supposed to be just waking up, he amended his story to say that he didn't set his alarm for 4:30 and got up alone. When he was questioned specifically about the day of her disappearance, he said the day was one of the best the couple had had in some time. Barry said he was working with a co-worker in Salida that morning. He returned early, went on a hike with Suzanne, and then they grilled up some steak and were intimate. He said they went to bed together and suggested that it could have been the last time they saw each other, but as we've established, Barry is not the most reliable witness. When the police started to investigate Barry, they found out that he had lied about just about everything that happened that night. The investigators first knew something was wrong when they went through Barry's phone and vehicle telematic data on May 9th, 2020. While Barry and Suzanne Morphew did spend the afternoon and evening together, the events didn't align with Barry's narrative. At 2:42 to 2:44, the first significant deviation from Barry's accounts surfaced. His phone data revealed erratic movements around the property. When confronted by investigators, he said that he was likely hunting chipmunks with tranquilizers. At 2:47 p.m., Barry switched his phone to airplane mode, maintaining it until 10:17 p.m. Even the steak dinner he claimed to have shared with his wife was thrown into doubt. Investigators found only one dirty dish instead of two, and later that night, more peculiarities emerged on the Morphew property. The police noted additional concerning details during their scrutiny of the data from later that night. At 9:30 p.m., an hour after Barry claimed to have gone to sleep with his wife, his car reversed, moving 96 feet backward from the driveway. Investigators speculated this might have been when he loaded her body onto his truck if he was guilty. From 3:25 to 3:48, the records indicated that the door to his truck opened and closed over 80 times. Though circumstantial, the evidence hinted at information Barry wasn't sharing with the police, prompting a closer look into the events of May 10th. Interviews with co-workers revealed that Barry was not supposed to be in Broomfield that day. Their contract wasn't set to begin until a week later, meaning there was no project to inspect. According to Barry, he only visited the Holiday Inn, the job site, a local store for granola and water, and briefly stopped at McDonald's to clean his windshield. However, surveillance footage obtained by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation contradicted his account. Barry was observed disposing of 5 trash bags near McDonald's and the Holiday Inn. When confronted with the footage, Barry provided an odd reason for his disposal method, claiming he wanted to clean his car without incurring proper disposal fees. Naturally, Barry's explanation unraveled when officers inspected his car. A co-worker also reported a strong smell of bleach and chlorine in Barry's hotel room a day after Suzanne's disappearance. Furthermore, investigators discovered that Barry changed his clothes multiple times throughout the day. As damaging as Barry's actions might seem, investigators had discovered no motive. That changed when they looked deeper into their personal lives. Barry and Suzanne's daughter revealed that both of them were not exactly as happy as Barry would like the police to believe. The text messages they discovered when they recovered Suzanne's phone and personal belongings from the house proved it. To say they were having marital problems would be an understatement. She was deeply unhappy in the marriage and talked about how her husband would not even consider divorce. In her notes app, she kept a list of grievances that paint a pattern of physical abuse. Suzanne even mentioned that she was afraid to be alone in a room with him. She was also worried about his drinking, repeated attempts to seize her phone, and even speculated that he was unfaithful to her. When the police stormed the Morphew house on May 20th, they discovered a pen that Suzanne had purchased to catch her husband in the act. Ironically, it recorded her affair, not his. Her lover was a man named Jeff, whom Suzanne went to high school with. The affair had allegedly gone on for 1.5 years, starting around 2018. While Jeff sounded like an obvious suspect, the police were able to clear him of any involvement. Investigators believed that Barry somehow found out about the affair, and a note Suzanne wrote 2 days before her disappearance corroborated their theory. Barry had accused her of having a boyfriend. The spy pen, while instrumental, was not the only vital piece of information they uncovered in their search of the Morphew house. They found the cap of a tranquilizer dart in the family's dryer, a spent bullet casing in the bedroom, a large crack in the door frame, and what they believed to be the remnant of Suzanne's journal in the fireplace. All of these findings, combined with the telematic data, suggested that Barry might have planned the murder of his wife and killed her sometime in the afternoon of May 9th, 2020. The phone data from Suzanne's phone corroborated that story. After texting her boyfriend 53 times and sending him a selfie at around 2:10 p.m., she never used it again. The public did not learn that Barry was a suspect in his wife's disappearance until 2 weeks later when the police carried out a 2-day excavation of a construction site in Salida, which was one of Barry's job sites. In response to that, Barry released an odd video to the public, declaring his innocence. Barry Morphew was not arrested until May 5th, 2021, nearly a year since the investigation had begun. The evidence against Barry was circumstantial at best, but with the changing stories, repeated lies, and clear motive, the prosecution seemed confident in their case. Barry was charged with the first-degree murder of his wife, tampering with physical evidence, possession of a dangerous weapon, and attempting to influence a public servant. As if all that was not bad enough, Barry was also charged later on with filing a fraudulent election ballot in Suzanne's name. He claimed that he didn't know it was wrong and that Trump could use the extra vote. Barry pled guilty to the charge and paid a $600 fine. In August 2021, a preliminary hearing was held to decide if Barry Morphew's case would go to trial. And it was during this time that most of the information regarding the case became public knowledge. Over 4 days, the prosecution slowly presented the evidence they'd gathered and postulated what they thought might have happened. Barry killed his wife on May 9, 2020, took her body apart in a hotel room, disposed of the tools used, and buried her body in an unmarked grave. Barry's defense, however, pushed back hard, poking holes in the prosecution's story. They pointed to the fact that cadaver dogs could not find any signs of human remains in Barry's car and the hotel room where he supposedly brought her body. They also alluded to the fact that the dart bullet cover might have been planted. There were visual inconsistencies in the pictures taken of the dryer. One showed that the cap was in the dryer, and another showed that it wasn't. The defense also stated that it would have been impossible for Barry to have used his dart gun to aid in the alleged murder since it was broken at the time. However, the defense team's smoking gun was the partial DNA they discovered in Suzanne's Range Rover and on her bike helmet, none of which matched Barry. What made the discovery such a big deal was that the DNA found in her car matched the ones found in 3 unsolved sexual assault investigations in Chicago and Arizona. raising reasonable doubt. Why was this not brought up earlier? The CBI investigator who collected the evidence went on military leave before he could follow up on the lead. To make matters worse, the defense was never informed of the existence of the foreign DNA matches. They were learning about it for the first time during that hearing, meaning the prosecution withheld exculpatory evidence that could have aided the defense. Throughout the hearing, the defense argued that with the existence of another suspect with a criminal record, the prosecution did not have enough evidence to prove that Barry should be convicted of the killing of his wife. They asked the judge to rule quickly on his decision, but oddly, he delayed his decision, citing the hundreds of man-hours and resources put into the case. It wasn't until September 7th that the judge decided that the case would move forward and set Barry's bail at $500,000. Barry walked out of county jail with his daughters on September 20th, 2021. 9 days before the trial was set to begin, the prosecution filed a motion to dismiss all charges against Barry without prejudice. What this means is that the prosecution is free to restart the case at any point, pending new information. Without a body of reasonable doubt on whether Barry committed the murder and misconduct on the part of the prosecution, it would have been a hard win. The prosecution also missed several deadlines, which earned them sanctions that excluded 14 key witnesses from the trial. The world was shocked when news broke of the dismissal, and Barry could be seen exiting the courthouse with a big smile on his face, and his 2 daughters with him. On September 22nd, 2023, a group of investigators dug up several shallow graves located in Moffat, Colorado, following an investigation. Suzanne's remains were identified with her dental records and chemotherapy port over 50 miles away from the projected search area, which was the mountains surrounding Barry's property. With the discovery of her body, people question if Barry could still be technically considered a suspect in the murder, since the police are certain that Barry's truck was not in Moffat on the 9th and 10th of May. Some people have pointed out that Barry could have had help in disposing of her body, and he could have made the trip to Moffat to bury the body and head back. Perhaps if they got a subpoena for his phone and car data for a longer period, they might be able to link him to where Suzanne's remains were discovered. But for now, Barry seems to be in the clear. However, the police and district attorney's office have not thrown in the towel yet. The district attorney of the 12th Judicial District told CNN that the case is still under investigation, and she would not be able to comment until more information is known, but they did offer their condolences to Suzanne's family. Iris Etienne, Barry's attorney, has been very vocal since the body has been recovered, hinting that it's more likely that Suzanne was one of the many victims of a serial killer since her remains were discovered in a boneyard. She believes that Barry was wrongfully targeted by law enforcement and hopes that they might eventually admit that they were wrong. In the meantime, Barry has begun a $15 million lawsuit against the prosecutors, sheriff stations, and many investigators, claiming he was wrongfully charged in the disappearance and death of his wife.